There we go. Nice to see everybody today. Good to be seen. It's always good to be seen. Means you're alive, right? Who doesn't love being alive? Like, the alternative is terrible. Anyway, great to see you. Nice to have you. My name is Dean. Welcome to the program. We've got a special program for everybody today. You know, sometimes stars align. It's funny because life is a journey. I tell that to everybody I talk to. Work with different people about the way that they feel and how they act and on drinking and all the other stuff that we go through. We talk about it here on the podcast all the time with Lachlan, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And the way I feel about my life today is very, very different than the way I felt about my life like 4 or 5 years ago. And I'll tell you why. Because I'm grateful today. And I didn't even know what that word meant. I had no idea what the word meant. Grateful. What's grateful? You fucking only losers say grateful. What are you grateful for? I'm grateful for everything. I'm grateful for all the good shit. I'm grateful for all the bad shit, because this is the life experience that we live. And sometimes this life experience, you get these aha moments, right? In this life, you get these moments where you're like, oh, okay, that's what we should all be doing. Oh, well, that's the person I should be working with. Oh, I get it. That's how I should look at life. And this week was one of those weeks. It was like an epiphany week. You know, when you get those notifications on your calendar, it's like, hey, it's blue and red week. It's left-handed Lithuanian week. It's all those things. It's like this week. This was epiphany week for Dean. And I'll explain why real quick, because I don't want to waste any more time. We here at Crier Media have done the job that we've needed to do to put some kind of interesting media on the map in this country. Canada has been largely kettled by terrible media for a very long time. Very few people on it. Specifically all the big blowhorns. Everything's been consolidated. 2 or 3 big media companies that, you know, protect certain people, certain industries, certain politicians, certain cultures from actually being spied on or reported on accurately. This is the way we live in Canada. It's the same thing across the world, right? We all know this. We all know that in media, specifically in this kind of media, reactive media, proactive media, there are very few people who are willing to actually come and tell you the truth. So we pride ourselves on that entertainingly from time to time, maybe trolly from time to time, but we like to pride ourselves on the fact that we don't push around bullshit, and we try to explain things to people the best we can and also entertain people. There's one person in this country who's been doing it for 40 years better than anyone else in this country, and I would put him up against anybody in the world. This gentleman is not just one of those people. When I started doing radio, I would listen to and go, oh my God, how do you do that? That is incredible. How is this guy able to do that? Formulate thought, be that compelling. He's a titan in the media industry. He's a legend. He's a Lifetime Achievement Award winner, 40 years in the industry, in radio, in media. He's what you call a Swiss Army knife. He can kind of do everything. And that's what we love here, people who want to be engaged. And this week, it gave me great pleasure to announce that we hired maybe the most important person in the fabric of Canadian media history to come and join us here at Crier Media. And I would like to welcome him to the podcast today and introduce him to you. And we're going to have some fun today. Really unfettered fun, because we don't work for anybody but ourselves. Please welcome to the program and to Crier Media, Mr. Charles Adler, ladies and gentlemen. Charles, nice to see you.
Dean, if I had any idea that you'd be this nice to me, it wouldn't have taken me 3 hours to get a contract out on Lachlan. And holy crow, who in Canada can be this kind and generous? Which I know wasn't your reputation for years when
No.
your rep was being distorted by the evil giants of Canadian media. But
Yeah.
folks, you got to know that nobody is kinder and more benevolent, more loving, more life affirming than Dean Blundell.
You know, that's it's going to take a while to sell people on that, Charles. You know, we're going to have to do this like daily, just to get people to believe that. But thank you. Yeah, we worked together for a long time, but we never even crossed paths, did we?
In the business that we grew up in, you don't actually have to meet anybody to hold hands with them. You know, we see each other on screens, and we know of each other. And I gather that working at headquarters for Chorus at Sugar Beach, right beside what's the name of that refinery that adds
Red Path Sugar?
Yeah, it is such a gorgeous odor in that part of the world. The radio doesn't stink, but the beach does.
Yeah,
Anyway,
it stinks now along with the beach. It's seeped in. It's seeped in. Yeah.
I wasn't. I wasn't going to say that. Red Path Broadcasting stinks. But in any case, putting all that aside, I think that the first time that you became very, very physically aware of me and likely pained by some of my breaks that might not have been award winning was whenever you visited the C-suite. And I think at times, depending on the mood of whoever was in the office, my show might have been on and blasting into your eardrums.
Yeah, because you're nationally syndicated. So Charles and I both work for Chorus Entertainment. I think the share price of that stock is just below $1.50 now, so that's good. So we both work for Chorus Entertainment when radio and television was a thing, like when it wasn't referred to like it's referred to VCRs and 8-tracks. So, but Charles, and just to give people some backstory, you were it. Like, this company that we work for is one of the biggest broadcast companies in Canada. I was doing a radio show at a rock station in Toronto. And everywhere you went in the hallways, as you pointed out, they were not pumping in our show because it was highly offensive. It was highly offensive. You can't have that on in the coffee shop. Highly offensive. And so it was Charles. Like, it was, you were the voice of the radio station. We'd come in and you'd be on 640 when I would leave home, and I would listen to you, and we get reruns of your show, and I would legitimately get downloads, like audio file downloads of your podcast or your show before it became a podcast or anything, before you did anything like that, anything digital. I would get, dude, I was excited to tell you this. And I would go home and listen to it because I wanted to listen to your cadence. I wanted to listen to how you delivered stuff. I wanted to listen to how you would break down stories and bring people along for you because, dude, and I'm professional courtesy, but this is true. We work together now, so I don't have to blow sunshine up your hoop. You are the best I have ever heard in my life. And it is such a great pleasure to work with you. But how do you do it? Like, did you grow up just with this gift? Did you, the gift of storytelling? Like, how do you go from, a kid growing up in Montreal to the greatest storyteller in Canadian history, in my estimation?
Well, I owe it all to the WEF and the United Nations. they created
George
me.
Soros.
George Soros invented me in a lab. So, if we want to talk about reality, I was given some great gifts, even though I grew up at a very, very calamitous time, post-war, post-revolutionary Hungary, lots of violence. So we can get into some details on that. But I grew up in a very, very dysfunctional, paranoid, evil world. The chances of me being alive are, I don't know. I've talked to people at MIT, 1 in 100 million, 1 in 300 million, depending on how the stats are allocated. My parents had death warrants with their names on them. They were both supposed to be executed. I mean, that's the world I come from. And as I say, Dean, if we find the time to offer specifics, I can do that. But the point is, I grew up in a very volatile world, and the world that I needed as a child to keep me sane, or at least relatively sane, was radio. And radio was my escape hatch from this nightmare of a world that I was living in. I was living with people who had survived a lot of trauma, but it's impossible to survive trauma without the footprints of the trauma all over your psyche, which makes you generally very emotionally unreliable, sometimes inaccessible, sometimes sad for weeks and months and even years at a time. So a child, yours truly, needed something dramatically different for my head, and radio was just what the doctor ordered.
Interesting, because you touch on something. It's like this alternative reality that people create for themselves in that industry, right? Depending on how you feel about yourself, your upbringing, or your background, right? And I find that really is a common thread between a lot of very successful radio people, or people who have experienced success, is the curation of this reality that you needed to create because of X amount of circumstances or whatever it is. But it also doesn't account for your ability to communicate, right? when did you start? Like, how did you get into radio? I know grew up in Montreal, and you've had one of the more legendary careers in terms of attrition. How long you've been doing it? How long you've been at the top of your game, being nationally syndicated? So, how does that kid who created this beautiful, different reality to be able to survive become the storyteller that you are?
It all comes from the word survivor. My parents are survivors of the Holocaust and some other nasty pieces of business. But let's just, the big picture is they barely survived the Holocaust. Most of their families were wiped out, but they barely survived. And I grew up with this need to survive myself, because when the trauma is passed on to you, and I don't want to get into any psychobabble about this and lose the audience. I just want people to understand that it's impossible for anyone. I don't care whether you're with parents, family members who have been involved in a horrible accident, a kidnapping, crime victims, people who have seen people being tortured and murdered. It doesn't matter to me. It's got nothing to do with the specifics of it. It's all about the trauma. So when you're raised in an environment of trauma, all you're really doing is trying to survive. And so radio became the world that I felt was a safer world than the world I was living in. And I needed to survive. And the only way I could survive was to become the best. That was how my child's mind assessed it from the age of 8 or 9. And the business about storytelling, that is a gift that I got from my mom, who's one of the greatest natural-born storytellers I've ever heard. It doesn't matter what room she's into. She owns the room. And oddly enough, when you grow up with someone like my mom, even though she experiences long bouts of sadness and things can be very dramatic, no different than other performers. When people are in the room and she has to, in her mind, to survive, entertain them, because that's part of what she had to do when she was 9 to get through living in the ghetto in Budapest. That's where she had the death warrant around her neck, essentially. She had to figure out ways of amusing people, entertaining people, telling them stories was the way that she did it. She became, because of the situation that she was in, a storyteller. I, as a survivor, a person needing to survive, also became a storyteller. It got handed down to me. So when people, offer nice strokes the way you just have to introduce this segment of this particular podcast, it doesn't matter how many nice things you say about me. I give all the credit to my mom and my dad. I joke about the George Soroses and the WEFs just to make fun of all the conspiracy kooks and cranks and crackpots out there. But the two architects of this particular product are Mike and Rose Adler, and I can never thank them enough, and I never stop thinking about them. Some people might even accuse me of obsessing about them. That may be true, but they're on my shoulders, and I will not do anything to embarrass the family name. Unlike you, Dean Blundell, who I did a little bit of homework on you before I decided to sign on with you. And apparently you, over the years, you did manage to do a couple of things to embarrass your wonderful family name.
Yeah, I did. However, my folks are cool with it because of a little something called unconditional love. They're like, "Hey, you're okay."
Well, they're very forgiving, and I'm grateful. I'm grateful to your folks for being. My folks would not be as kind to me if I did to them what you did to your folks. So, thank you very much, Blundell family.
You're very welcome. Life is a journey, and I love surrounding myself with people who understand that life is a journey. And you fall down and you get up. And if you don't learn from your experiences, you're an idiot, right? But you go back to your parents and what you were talking about with your dad. This is the thing that's put on your Twitter feed at Charles Adler. Please follow Charles. I love this, by the way. It's pinned on your Twitter feed. This is from April 20th. Hey,
it's my hero.
Yeah.
Everyone needs a hero. Everyone needs someone. Christians talk about walking the walk of Jesus. Mike Adler is my Jesus, and not saying that to offend Christians or anyone else, but he is my savior. Mike Adler put me in a backpack in 1956 when the Soviet tanks were rolling into Hungary. Things could not have been more dangerous. My dad put me in a very, very old backpack. I was just 2.5 years old. I wasn't nearly as fat as I am right now. So he was able to fit me in that backpack, and he strapped me to his back. And we ran and ran and ran for the border. And we may have done a few things to make sure we could get to the border, but it was all in the interest of saving. My father saved my life, and so I talk to him every day. And how do I talk to him? I'm doing it right now. I'm talking to Dean Blundell. I'm talking to Canadians. I'm talking to Americans. I'm talking about people who are listening to us around the world right now. But the person that I am always talking to, people say, how do you achieve that one-on-one thing that you do? Well, the way I achieve it is I'm talking to Dad right now. And Dad, I love you very much. By the way, Dean, can I ask you a question? Not because I need to lighten up the moment, but when you say cadence, first of all, I want you to define cadence for the folks watching and listening to this. Cadence is a very big deal in broadcasting and podcasting and communications. And I can't be objective myself. So after you define cadence, if you can tell me what it is about Mike Adler's son, the son of a tailor is who you're talking to right now. What is it about this son of a tailor's cadence that stands out to you as somewhat different from most cadences that your ears are bathed in?
It's deliberate and confident, and it is easy to understand, and you have a way of popularizing things that nobody else in this country can do. I do it, but I use way too much slang, and it gets lost in the in the translation because I may include a fuck or a shit in there. And I've followed you long enough to know that hey, Charles Adler may include some of those things in some of his tweets as well, and you're not shy. But my point is that you have this ability that nobody else has to simply, powerfully put things in layman terms that are very, very difficult for most people to actually communicate. And it was funny because when you're in radio, you like to think, dude, radio people. We were all egomaniacs. We're all these people. It's like, I'm in Toronto. I make all this money. I'm this guy. So there's no one better than me in the country. Like I used to say that to myself all the time. Every morning I'd get up at 3:00 in the morning and I'd literally put my feet on the ground and I'd say, there is no one better at this in the world than me. And I didn't get up at 4 in the morning to fucking lose. And I'll tell you that right now. So the hubris that was involved in Dean 1.0 was incredible. But I had two people that I always looked at and like, those people are fucking the gold standard. And it was you because of the confidence and the delivery of what you would do, and you would do it on a daily basis. Like it was, and if you've never been in this industry, like if you haven't been in radio, if you haven't done live radio, high test radio in a big market, nobody can understand the stress and how difficult and the load that you carry. Like, sure, is it an easy job? Yeah. Did I do the job with my feet up on the counter and bring the microphone in and have a microphone so I could fart into on the side? Yeah, for sure. I mean, it was all those things. It was fun. It was impulsive. It was weird. But people don't understand how difficult it is to do intellectual content where you're educating people and entertaining people and making the most difficult conversations to understand incredibly easy for everybody to access. That's what I'm referring to for cadence. So long answer to a short question. Sorry.
No, it's a great answer, and it's interesting. People who want to, whether they're in the business or not, people want to attack me. They're always somehow coming up with this fantasy that I insert some sort of software to sound on the air the way nobody could possibly sound like off the air. Mm-hmm. You're my witness, brother. Is it any different?
No,
do I
every phone call.
Yeah.
We've had, how many phone calls have we had? Like 5 or 6, ranging from like 20 minutes to 3 hours over the past week and a half. Yeah. This gentleman, as you're sitting here talking to him, this is who he is. This is authentically who Charles Adler is. And, having the distinct pleasure of, being able to listen to you for the past 3 years. And everybody in radio, sometimes, there are radio voices. We all know that there are radio voices. This is not a radio voice. This is who you are. This is how you speak. This is how you speak privately, publicly. This is how you speak when you're doing your show. And listen, there are a couple of reasons why I know you're a great match for Crier Media, and everybody at Crier is very, very excited to have you. authenticity is one of them. It's probably the most important thing because I fucking hate duplicity. Everybody does. In the digital world, you can smell it. Like it's just like a stink that sits on people where it's like, oh, that guy's clickbait. That's bullshit. He's not interested in helping anybody. It's garbage. Like this Charles Adler, as you see in front of us, is the Charles Adler. There's no clickbait version of him. That is not his radio voice. And on top of it, it's soothing to listen to.
Well, I appreciate that. Animals, just not that this matters to everybody, but it matters to people who own pets. If you're listening to my podcast and you've got it on speakers, don't be surprised if it soothes your pet. Don't be surprised if you have a neurotic dog or ferret that they will relax. It'll be, listening to me for pets. It's the equivalent of doing reefer for many musicians that we won't talk about because they're not. Then many of them are gone, but they went out with a smile.
Yeah, sure they did. Let me ask you something, because you're starting a podcast, like we're talking about it, and we got to kind of get to the nitty gritty and the details before we get into a few other things. But during the process of winning the Charles Adler sweepstakes, that's how I like to say it because it's true. And obviously having you involved in what we're doing, we want to work with you because you have the ability to communicate. So you're going to do that two different ways. You're going to podcast. And you're going to write. You are going to take the lead on a whole bunch of different issues that are very difficult to understand, because this is the access we wanted to give people. We wanted to give people access to Charles Adler because you do content that everybody trusts, and you want to breathe a little love and humanity back into the media landscape. But how are you going to do that? So take us through that journey with your podcast and some of the written work.
Well, as far as the podcast is concerned, much of the podcast will be just like what you're seeing right now. So, I mean, I'll be talking to people. I won't be talking to Dean all the time. Dean is not good enough to be on my podcast regularly, but I will talk to Dean occasionally. The tongue is always
funny because it's true.
The tongue is always in the cheek, but there's a molecule of truth there, and that's all you need in public communications.
Look, I'm going to tell you right now, this is exactly why we wanted you to work here, because I am not good enough to do that stuff. That's the truth.
The thing is that the truth is overrated. I mean, in court, you're supposed to tell the whole truth and nothing but the truth. But the reality is, in the world of podcasting, broadcasting, it is theater of the mind. So all stories that you will hear are based on a true story. It's what it's based on is what gives the story authenticity. But if you're going to communicate, I guess in a sense, I'm talking to people because I know that so many people who are paying attention to these podcasts are people who want to do podcasting or broadcasting or public communications, or simply learn how to be more eloquent, more articulate, more vivid in the conversations that they have every day, because they have read somewhere in a self-help book that if you're a better communicator, you're going to be making more money. You'll be more valuable to somebody, some corporation.
That's why Dale Carnegie exists, by the way. That's why Dale Carnegie and Toastmasters exist.
Right. So I just want to point out to people, if they forget everything else that they're listening to in this little visit, just remember this: always be telling stories. There was a terrific movie called Gary Glen Ross, which was based on a terrific play. And in one particular scene, the scene that most people remember if they've watched Glen Ross, I don't think I've seen it more than 15 or 16 or 17 or 117 times. But in one particular segment, the master salesman is saying, always be closing, always be closing. And what you need to remember if you're studying public communications is always be telling a story. So what will we have on these podcasts? There'll be stories, and there'll be stories based on true stories. And the reason that's so important to me is if you try to tell the whole truth and nothing but the truth, it sounds like a police report. And this isn't to knock the cops. We need cops and we need police reports in courts, which are never as exciting in real life as they are on television. The reason they're exciting on television is because all of the production and editing, and they're always based on a true story. So the only thing I want to leave you with here on this particular segment of the program is, if you're worried about telling the whole truth, if you're worried about pouring on all of the facts, in whatever it is that you're talking about, you will lose your audience. People are not interested in thousands and thousands of facts. They're interested in a good story. Because to cut to the chase of what humanity is like, I talked about the child earlier who wanted to be on the radio because that to him was the only safe world that he knew of, and that was me. What I learned very, very young is that you stay young in a certain sense. You're always the child who wants to hear Papa or Mama tell a story. And so that's the advice I have, because Dean wants me to be, giving advice, giving counsel, making people feel better about themselves, making people feel that they have a chance to become more successful if they're listening. Because it doesn't matter what you're doing in this life.
Nope.
You have to be of service to somebody. And so if we're talking about podcasting for people, for real people and real humanity, we've got to give them something. So that's what I want to give you every time that you give me the privilege of being able to visit with you. I want to improve your life. It doesn't mean that I'm going to be preaching at you. It doesn't mean that I'm going to be asking you for money to buy a mug, although I'm sure that Crier, being a business, after all, this is a business.
Yeah, we got mugs. We got mugs, hats, and shirts coming, and pencils, by the way.
Charles Adler mugs, Charles Adler, whatever, hash pipes, Charles Adler this, Charles Adler that. You may be sick
you're
of
giving
my
me
name
more
at some
ideas
point.
for merch. Like, the more you talk, the more I'm coming. I'm going to come up with a Charles Adler gravity bong if you're not careful.
Merchandising has been a big part of my life, because one of the things that I don't want to be a downer here, but one of the things that was for some people something that would have looked like a movie that might bum you out if you had all the facts is we weren't just lower middle class. We weren't just working class immigrants. We were just dirt poor. As a friend of mine observed many years ago, we didn't have a pot to piss in or a window to throw it out of. And so, when I was very, very young, long before it was legal, I had to work. I had to find ways of working in order to put food on the table. We had some economic droughts, sometimes small family business. Talk about being the son of a tailor. My dad's shop was called Adler's Tailor Shop. It was just a one-horse show, just my dad and, of course, me doing whatever I could to help out. But one of the ways that I was able to help put food on the table was buying and selling. And that started when I was 8 or 9 years old. I found rich people. That's one of the reasons I tend not to defecate all over the rich. The rich were able to help me survive, help my family survive, because some of our rich customers, as rich people are wont to do, don't want to keep their stuff around for very long. They're always wanting to replace their stuff. So they're throwing out their stuff, or they're just giving it away at very small prices. So here you've got this 8 or 9 year old storyteller delivering clothes to them and entertaining them with the stories that I had for them. And while I was telling the stories, I was always looking around to see if they had something that I might be able to get for a very, very good price. So it started out with ashtrays, and it became coffee tables, and it became sofas, and it became refrigerators, and everything but the family Rolls Royce was something that I would want to get my hands on for a good price. And so they would sell stuff to me, and I would fill up garages with the stuff that I was getting. And so I would get rich people's quality stuff at very, very cut rate Charles Adler prices, and then I would resell them at the garage sales, to working class people. That's a way that I was able to get some cash flow going. And if anyone is watching this who is part of the CRA, sorry, this was well over 5 decades ago. You can't get me for this.
Yeah, they're going to come back to you and try and claw back. Okay, Charles, you just admitted to having a fucking garage full of rich people shit. Can we see some receipts? No, sorry, that was in 1968. I'm sorry, you can't see any receipts.
Statute of limitations. I know the law, guys. Okay, I know the law.
You and everybody else on Twitter, hey? Everybody knows the law. No, I know how the law works, and you guys are all wrong. Really, Johnny 6299. So tell me something, because you're going to get into it, right? You're going to get into what you want to get into, and I don't know if you've ever really had that freedom. I know, doing a nationally syndicated show on 40, 50 different radio stations for many, many years has prepared you to be able to do whatever you want. You're the king of talk in this country. Fearless Fred and I were talking about it yesterday. He texted me, and he's like, Adler, huh? That's incredible. I'm like, dude's the king. But what are you going to do that's different? Because, like, in our conversations when we're talking about planning your podcast, the Charles Adler podcast or the Charles Adler brand, there were some revelations to you where it's like, really, I can do that. Like, it's so okay. And because we come from a very rigid, very protective, almost uber conservative and valueless industry, right? So, like, what's the flower going to open up to? There's the question there.
Sometimes, by the way, Dean, I react to some of what you say about the industry. I tell you, because gratitude. My grandma Elizabeth, she taught me most of my values, and I think one of her top three was gratitude. And so sometimes, when we talk about the industry, my grandma Elizabeth is on my shoulder, telling me to simmer down or to edit myself, because she would say that I ought to be grateful. The industry did treat me very handsomely. Maybe not in the sort of the most recent years where it was clear that I really couldn't do what I wanted to do. But just in terms of pure compensation, I think this would be a good time for you to confess, Dean, that the industry, no matter how many snowballs you want to throw at it, the industry did treat Dean Blundell very well.
Very, very, and before we get into this conversation, because obviously we've got darts, we're going to throw some darts here. Before we get into this conversation, I will tell you that I'm the luckiest guy in the world. I am incredibly grateful for a guy like John Cassidy taking time and a chance on a 28-year-old kid, bringing him to Toronto and saying, go for it. Let's see what happens, right? And that was 15 years and millions of dollars. And, they were good to us. They were good to me. Were they good to some other people in different positions? Not for me to say. But it would be incredibly disingenuous for either of us to start in a conversation where we're going to sewer the entire industry without saying, but the companies that we worked for, by and large, treated you and I incredibly well.
And
right?
every story has a big fat but. And I'm glad you mentioned Cassidy, because regardless of anything you may hear me say today or going forward, if John Cassidy or anyone who knows John Cassidy is listening, I just want you to know, John, I'm not talking about you. You treated me like gold. I can never love you enough. I can never thank you enough for what you did for me.
Yeah, dude, and that is an incredible statement, because it's shared by many people. I don't know anybody that doesn't like John. John was the former CEO of Chorus Entertainment, and he was responsible for, by and large, my career. I know he added a wealth of experience to your career, and I know you trusted him and respected him as much as I did. Those times are over, though. And radio is
stock wasn't at $1.50 when John was.
It was around $52. Yeah. 5 years later, who knew? Other than everybody. Anyway, we'll get to that in just a second. But the podcast gives you a chance to be able to open up into this thing, this person, right? This guy who doesn't have to take into account his program director's relationship with a guy who's an MLA, the general manager's connection to, a certain business. And because that is, for a lot of people, just to kind of let you behind the curtain of Oz, which it is, when you get behind that curtain, there are levers and triggers when it comes to an on-air person being allowed to deliver really honest content that really sit in executive relationships, that really sit in money and possible ad revenue, et cetera, et cetera. We don't have any of those hangups here. So, like, how does that make you feel getting ready to go on this journey?
Well, I feel great. I mean, look, one of the great corruptors in the business, and it's got nothing to do with radio or television, Canada, the United States, Western Canada, Eastern Canada. It's just a sort of a sore on the business, which has always made me very, very sore. And most media businesses depend on access. And in the case of news talk, they depend on access to public figures. Most of them are politicians. And so someone like yours truly comes along, and I'm a bit dangerous, even though I was always portrayed as a conservative, and I would call myself a conservative. A conservative prime minister called Stephen Harper almost never wanted to come on my show, because he would prefer to be on the shows with the so-called friendlies, people who just threw softballs at him. And if you keep throwing softballs at a paranoid person, he can make it look like a home run every time he gets up at bat, and I didn't softball people. And so I was seen as dangerous. And so if you're seen, by the prime minister as dangerous, and by the way, this has nothing to do with conservatives. Jean Chrétien never came on my show. Paul Martin never came on my show. He may have wanted to meet me the odd time in airport hangars and other places,
back alleys.
As almost every single prime minister has wanted to meet with me, to talk with me, to give them a sense of what's going on out there in the real world, because I wasn't, kissing up to them like many of the people who were being paid very, very good money to be his trusted advisors. So yes, it's true that I got to meet some very famous and powerful people over the years that went on even after I left radio. That's never changed. That will never change, because the most honest person that I ever met in my life is the person who put me in his backpack, and I have gotten some of that very important virtue from my dad. Look, the thing that's most difficult for me when I'm in the traditional world of broadcasting is the idea that we ought to be kind to certain people. We ought to not, rip their hearts out. We ought to not judge their character. We ought to not do the kinds of things that would really embarrass them, even though it would enlighten the public. We ought not do that, because if we do that, they won't come back. Whether it's on the phone or the studio or on Zoom, it doesn't really matter. We want to have access to them because we believe that the only way we can be authoritative and credible, 5-star on all of that, maintain the $1.50 stock price, is to make sure that we have all those important political personalities on the air. Yeah. And that to me has always been a nuisance. It never, ever, ever occurred to me that my success in communicating with people depended on having mediocre politicians or even excellent politicians on the air. I can talk politics all day long. I can talk politics 7 days a week without any sleep, and you won't be counting the amount of politicians that I have on the air. I will likely have none. I can talk about politics without them, but the truth is, and this will sound very immodest, I guess, many others can't, whether they're in the business of delivering the news, producing the news, or even doing talk, unless they've got all the props around them, unless they've got sound bites of these politicians that they have talked to, unless they have these politicians on as guests. Okay, we're opening up the line. Estevan, you're on the air with Stephen Harper, the Prime Minister. Those kinds of shows. What makes me laugh about that in retrospect is most of those shows with these politicians that these hosts wanted to have access to, most of those shows didn't do very well because they're boring. There is nothing more boring than a host throwing softballs at a politician, I don't care who they are, and then having guests, the guests meaning the callers, who are generally screened, coming on, stroking every single politician that they've got on. And, it's an infomercial for mediocrity. So what won't I be doing on the podcast? I won't be doing that. I'll swear on a stack of Bibles, by any religion, Christian, Jewish, Muslim, you name it. The Hindus have lots of gods. I will swear on every Hindu god's name that in God's name I will never revert to that. I don't have to do that now with Crier Media. There's no pressure on me. And even though there may have been some people involved in the old world that I lived in who did put pressure on me to be nice to the odd politician, whether they were conservative or liberal, that's just not happening. So if that's something that concerns you, is Chuck going to be, kissing a lot of political ass? I don't think so.
No, and it's amazing because it's not something you've ever done. In my estimation of understanding who you are, but you also come from the same time that I came from, which is, and you brought up a fucking great point, access, right? In media, in traditional media. And there's a lot of people that understand this because the kettling or the perception, whitewashing, if you will, of, politicians in this country works exactly as you've just explained it, which is, hey, don't ask this guy this question. This is a certain area he doesn't want to go into. And if you come to a guy like Charles or I, and I know you're wired like me, and I will speak for you right now. But if you come to a guy like Charles or I 20 minutes before an interview that we have set and prepped for and we're excited for because we know it's going to be compelling, because we get a chance to be honest and we get a chance to put someone in a box or maybe make them feel awkward because we look for those feelings on the radio, right? Like that was it. It was this compelling kind of, oh yeah, this is awkward. Now the guy's got to pedal back forth. It's very difficult for anybody in our situation to actually do what they tell us to do. Because I don't know if you're like me, and I think you might be. When someone says, oh, yeah, you can't ask Frank this question. He wanted me to let you know ahead of the interview. That's the first fucking question I would ask every single time. Because when they start dictating and your business arena starts dictating your content, which is all of media right now, that is all of traditional media. It is print, it is television, it is radio. The dictation of what you can and can't do to deliver the job that they're paying you to do, that your fucking food counts on, that your family counts on, they're telling you to absolutely be incredibly mediocre by not doing compelling content. That is the issue that this entire industry has had. And dude, I can't tell you how many times, and you and I, we talked about this on the phone. It's like, hey, tomorrow you're going to interview the fucking president of Country Style Donuts because they want to talk about how fresh their donuts are. I'm like, I'm not talking to the fucking guy from Country Style Donuts. They're like, well, we're going to find a morning show that will. And I'm like, go ahead. It's in like an hour. I'm not like, if you can find one.
I want to compete. I'm a competitive son of a bitch. I want to compete against the show that wants to do, an hour of, filleting the donut guy. Go ahead. Okay. Find someone else. I want to beat them.
Oh, dude. And in that quarter hour, I think the interview lasted for like 2 minutes. I don't want to get into the nitty gritty, but I did not do what they asked me to do. Yeah. Right now, here's the catch. In this space, this digital space, there is none of that. There's none of that. Right. And that's the fucking freeing part to me. When we're sitting here having this conversation where we were putting this whole deal together and we were trying to win the Charles Adler sweepstakes, there are times in our conversation where you're like, okay, well, wait a second. So I can do that. And we're like, yeah, man. And you can do it any time of the day you want. Is that easy to wrap your head around after 40 years being the gold standard in traditional media?
Well, at the beginning, it's a bit of a reach, but it's just like anything else. You start doing it, and then after a while, it becomes natural. So I mean, I just love the idea that the most frustrating aspect of radio for me was always the time slot. It didn't matter whether it was evening, morning, afternoon, whatever. I just knew that there were so many people. It didn't matter how many. I was very lucky. We attracted big audiences, but I knew that no matter how big the audience was, 10 share, 15 share, whatever it was, there were still just a whack of people who weren't available to have kind of a date with Chuck. They weren't available for what we used to call appointment tuning. They had other things to do. They had a life. They were working. They were doing stuff at that particular time. So if I'm on 9 to noon in Toronto, yeah, there's a massive amount of people. They're all over the Gardner. They're all over the 401. They're all over the so-called Golden Horseshoe, and it's wonderful. But that many of the people who would be appreciating what you're doing, whether you're doing humor, or you're doing serious stuff, it doesn't matter. They can't possibly be available to you. So with podcasts, I mean, I can't love this enough about podcasting. You don't have to make an appointment with me. You can just download me. You can listen to me at 2:00 in the morning, 2 in the afternoon. It doesn't matter. And although, yes, I love the effect of live, and I want to do as many live podcasts as possible and be able to respond to people who are responding to me, whether they're loving it, hating it, it doesn't matter, because I love that feel. I love being in the moment. I still really appreciate the fact that in order to visit with me every single day, it does not matter what time of day I'm laying it down. You can listen to me an hour later or 10 hours later or 10 weeks later. I'm absolutely confident that the technology that we have here at Crier will mean that you can listen to anything I do whenever I do it. And if you want to listen to it a year later or 2 years later, you can still do that. There's something about that that is so magnificent. Because, I talk about getting into the business when I was a teenager. I talk about having my mind about getting into the business when I'm a 7, 8, 9-year-old. I've been in radio basically in terms of my imagination. I've been in radio all my life. So we're talking about well over half a century. But, here's the big fat but. In this particular conversation, I never even dreamed of being able to access people 24/7. For this son of a tailor, that's a very big deal.
Oh man, dude, and you nailed it. Like it's on demand. It's just the world has changed, and the changes that we've seen have been, nuclear. You to a much greater extent because of the attrition you've had in this industry for over 4 decades. Being in the rooms that you've been. I know you took a spin at Fox News back in 2001. Your profile and what you've done has been incredible, but that was during a time when you could only access information and personalities one of three ways, right? It was either television, print, or radio. You were doing all three at the highest level, not just in this country, but for Canadian to do what you did was incredible. Now everything has changed, right? And speaking of that change, which I find really incredible too, is you've changed. And I don't want to say change in terms of, how people describe you, because one of the things people throw around is conservative, blah, 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 blah. But, you come from that time. I come from that time when people got involved in political parties for a couple of reasons, right? Community, you get involved in a political party because you believe financially in their fiscal responsibility. That was usually where political affiliation came from, right? As I was a young, dumb kid, I didn't really pay attention to it. Now I pay attention to it. That has changed. And, the responsibility that media has in this era that we live in, where disinformation and misinformation and rage farming, and you are very outspoken about these issues, whether you're on with Ryan Jesperson, who is one of the lodestars in this digital communication industry, and I can't wait to get to know him, whether you're talking with him, whether you're on with Nate from The Breakdown, no matter what you do, you approach your politics now from I've noticed a very different, very human perspective. Is that because you feel like you have a duty, and has your duty in this industry changed from the time when we were performers and news people riding for a brand, because now you have an opportunity to ride for the truth, which you always have, right? But in a more unabashed way. But do you feel like you have a different responsibility to do media in 2023 than you did maybe in 1995?
I think for too long, I took the idea of being a voice of conservatism a little too seriously, and at some point, it became a real albatross. And it was 4 years ago. It was actually I always say, just you don't have to put all the facts in. You don't have to tell the whole story, but I'm going to tell probably more of the story than you need to hear. It was precisely 4 years and
just
1
so you know,
month.
we only have another 4 hours, so
Okay, all right.
Speed it up.
It was 49 months ago. Okay,
Yeah,
you got specific. Okay, multiply that by 5. Anyway, it was 49 months ago. I'm not going to give you the weeks and the minutes, but it's 49 months ago when a person who I thought of as a friend, Jason Kenney, appeared on my show. He was just a few weeks away from his first opportunity to become the premier of the great province of Alberta, which has been very good to me in a just a multitude of ways over the years. They were the ones who made me feel like a star almost from the very beginning. The first live mic that I turned on and spoke into was in Calgary, Alberta. And so for anyone who listens to the podcast, anyone who is someone who has over the years listened to the broadcast who wonders why I have a special feel for Alberta, it's because I have a special place in my heart for Alberta. A lot of the real estate in my heart is taken up by Alberta because they gave me breaks not just once, but three times. So Grandma Elizabeth would say, be thankful to Alberta, and I certainly am. So here it is, 2 weeks before the election, and Jason Kenney is on the verge of being premier. All the polls show that this isn't close at all. He will win. So I thought it might be an idea for the people of Alberta to learn more about Jason Kenney. I thought it was going to be very positive because I was a supporter. It's not that I didn't see any faults at all, but I was a supporter. I thought Jason Kenney was a whip smart guy. Most politicians who I met were well, whip smart.
Not.
I am still blown away, and they are so lucky that media is the way it is. because there's so many politicians who aren't just whip smart. They're not just average. They're way, way behind average. Average would be a compliment in the real world for many of these real politicians. So Jason Kenney was, several steps ahead of them. And I was looking forward to having a really smart person as a prime minister someday, but then that didn't work out. So, so as a premier of Alberta. So I was totally ready for Jason Kenney to be a rock star on my show 49 months ago. Well, it didn't quite turn out that way. He just fell apart. He just imploded, and there were some character issues there that I had to end up discussing with him. Suffice it to say, it was Jason Kenney's worst night ever. The CBC, which had, I guess, tried to box in Jason Kenney and embarrass him and do things because he was very anti-CBC, they couldn't believe what they just heard. That they heard a conservative, a pillar, a voice of Canadian conservatism, do a live autopsy on Jason Kenney. So they wanted to interview me about that on several shows, including As It Happens. My life changed that night because on that night I had come out of the closet, as it were. I wasn't a deeper than deep, bluer than blue conservative. I was just a guy who tended to vote conservative. I was a guy who tended to support the Conservatives. I was a guy who really didn't, like socialism. A lot of that came from my background. Certainly didn't like those philosophies, those parties that had an authoritarian bent. That also had to do with my personal life. I just felt that the least of all evils, the Conservatives. But I was lukewarm about it. I wasn't this ferocious partisan, which of course is how I was portrayed, certainly by critics. Jason Kenney that night couldn't believe what had happened to him. And so the response from his team and the response from partisan Conservatives in Alberta was to try to portray me as some sort of agent of communism, and all sorts of names were used on social media. They did whatever they could to try to hurt my good name, as it were. Mm-hmm. And that liberated me. After that night, I no longer had to portray myself as a conservative, show any loyalty to the Conservatives. It was really easy because all of the Conservatives, all of the people who spoke for conservatism, including all of the various politicians, federal and provincial, boycotted my show. As far as they were concerned, I attacked the Pope. I character assassinated Pope Jason. He very much was considered the Pope of Canadian conservatism. How dare this Hungarian son of a tailor character assassinate the Pope? And that was probably the best thing that ever happened to my head. It liberated me. It made me as independent as possible. And so it gave me an opportunity to attack those people who are involved in the rage farming business and all of the other pieces of what I think of as right-wing nut jobbery. These are not friends of Canada. These are not friends of mine. And I feel no loyalty to them. And of course, everyone who pays attention to me on Twitter or down the road in the podcast that we're about to do, and certainly those people who listen to me in the final years of broadcasting that I was involved in, know that, yeah, I may be a former conservative, a former voice of Canadian conservatism, but you know what? I'm just my own voice right now. Mm-hmm. And what's most important to me is being the voice of real folks, of common Canadians. For years, I called my commentaries Canadian common sense. That hasn't changed at all. I still think about the common man, people like my father, the common woman, people like my mother. Those are the people that I work for. And if ever I strayed into the bowels of conservatism to the point where I may have lost touch with common people, I feel horrible. I feel horrible about that. Some people, including Lachlan Cross, who you have on with you regularly, your partner in crime, who's based in Edmonton, I think mentioned to you the other day, Dean, that while I may have been considered one of the voices of conservatism, he never thought of me as an ultra conservative, as an arch conservative, as a conservative partisan. Mm-hmm. And you ought to pay more attention to Lachlan because he's a very wise man.
Yeah, dude, and it's funny because for the history that I have with you in terms of listening, I know you were never a conservative guy. Like you would talk about platforms, you would talk about issues, and you identify with certain parts of that. That's how it used to be, but everything has changed, right? It is not that anymore. The Conservative Party of Canada is not a conservative party for people with fiscal conservative ideas. What do you make of it now? Like when you look at Pierre Poilievre, you look at the identity politics, you look at the rage farming, you look at the lack of accountability, the victim industry that he is really monetizing. How would you describe, conservatism in Canada as it is being led by someone who's incredibly fucking irresponsible when it comes to humanity?
Yeah, I just see it as a business. I mean, the idea for them is to raise as much money as possible for the conservative fund, and they raise money from a very most of their money comes from a very small percentage of Canadians. Most of them happen to be in rural Canada, and I've got nothing against trees and bugs and animals and farmers and all the rest of it. But there is a segment of rural Canada that is ultra right wing, wants Canada to be like it was 100 years ago, and that means that they don't have much patience, tolerance, or love for various minorities. Check off all of the boxes. Women are still thought of as a minority by some of these people. And it gets into the rest of it. The most controversial aspect of all of that now is transgendered folks. They're really taking it in the teeth from these right wing nut jobs. In any case, there is a lot of money to be raised from a very small percentage of Canadian humanity for some of the rage farming that the current Conservative Party is all about. And do I see them as the fiscal conservatives? No. Do I see them as centrist conservatives, progressive conservatives? Because that's how I thought of myself for most of my adult life. No, they're anything but progressive. And as far as Pierre Poilievre is concerned, I mean, if we're talking about just stuff that is extremely recent, I mean, he's decided to go after people who are addicted, who are getting their help from Safe Supply. And he's decided to basically call all of them a bunch of drug dealers. And he's basically decided to call the various provincial and governments and the federal government, major drug dealers for giving these people a so-called safer supply, because anecdotally, some of the safe supply has gotten into the hands of other people. And so Pierre Poilievre has decided to peddle the big lie, the biggest lie in Canada today, that the reason we've got a fentanyl epidemic, an opioid epidemic, the reason we've got thousands of people needlessly dying every year is because the government, specifically Justin Trudeau and various provincial governments that are not conservative, are killing these people. And it's unbelievable.
Giving them free drugs.
When I think about the lack
that's what he said.
of media coverage from, we'll call it conventional media, doubting him, listening to people who are professionals like the coroner in BC, who's absolutely disgusted about this, like police officers across the country who are absolutely disgusted, paramedics, doctors, nurses, in other words, everybody who knows what a big lie this is called in the digital lie that Pierre Poilievre engages in, is called an activist. The police apparently are activists. The coroner apparently is an activist. The people who are doing whatever they can to keep these people alive after they overdose, like their mums and dads, I guess they too are activists. It's very easy for me to just sit here and say, shame on you, Pierre Poilievre. But what I'm hoping for, just, fingers crossed, hoping some decent people who happen to vote conservative, and I do believe that the overwhelming majority of people who still vote conservative are decent, charitable, generous Canadians. That's the party, at least that's the brand that they grew up with. So they stay with that brand. It's no different than people of a certain faith. They stay with that church. They stay with that synagogue. They stay with that mosque. They stay with it. So I get all of that. But the people who are open-minded and do understand the difference between the truth and the lie, I'm just hoping that at some point they can get to Pierre Poilievre, that they could somehow penetrate that conscience, which only a very, very powerful microscope could possibly pick up, and somehow perforate the cement around that tiny conscience to get him to stop doing this, because of all the things that he has said over the years that just do not even ring close to true. This one is the one that bothers me the most, because this is evil.
Yeah, dude, you nailed it. I mean, I get to we get front row seat for this stuff, doing the content that we do, right? And my values, and you and I share very similar values for the benefit of a few private conversations that we've had. The rage farming, the paranoia, the telegraphing of doom, the connection that he has to old stock Canadians, and the dog whistling about the Magna Carta, all of those things. It is, you have touched on all of those things. But we used to live in a world where 5, 6, 7 years ago, that would have been red meat for media outlets. That would have been like, he would have been taken up behind the woodshed by every single publication, every single news outlet. And they present, this as an alternative, as a political alternative to governance, right? And because our values are very similar, and we look at that, it stands in contrast to who you and I are in terms of humanity, in terms of telling people the truth, in terms of trust, right? Which is why we're here. That's why media should exist. What do you make of the media landscape? Really not just paying attention to it, but almost legitimizing lies, hatred, the Fugazi attempt to force a certain group of people in this country to fight on his behalf and in his name against each other. Didn't media have a responsibility, and what happened?
So the short answer to a long question is, the people who run the media do not see it as in their interests to call it out. So many of their listeners are hooked on this binary business. Essentially, it's liberals or conservatives. I realize that some people, in between elections, park the votes, park their support with the NDP, but at the end of the trail, the liberals win those battles, because people who are to the left of the conservatives, after all, want to win. And so if in any given riding, and most of the ridings, liberals will be ahead of the NDP, the liberals end up benefiting from the anti-conservative support. But as far as the stations are concerned, TV, radio, the papers, I mean, they're just so beholden to this idea of it's either going to be the liberals or the conservatives. And so they just don't see it as in their interests to take a baseball bat to the modern conservative party. And I guess the other answer is that some of the things that they rage farm about, some of the things that they make their money on, are probably things that some people who own a media do believe in. I mean, I was, I guess, the biggest believer, biggest supporter in the world of the National Post. I mean, you always, just like Dean talks about getting up at 4 a.m. I mean, for most of my broadcasting life, I was getting up at 3, 4 o'clock in the morning. And to me, when I was in Toronto, it was, I thought I was like one of the luckiest people on earth that, 4:30 in the morning, I could go to the box and pick up the National Post, and I would read it like cover to cover. Mm-hmm. It was like a Bible to a religious person. And I mean, it's the National Post. I mean, the logo is still there, but there's nothing, almost nothing in the National Post that is National Post worthy. And so they, at the moment, carry the can for the Conservative Party of Canada. There's almost nothing in that paper that will be critical of anything that the party does. And it's the total opposite of how I perceived the National Post to be for years. I thought that they were the ones who had no sacred cows. They were just going to tell me the whole truth, nothing but the truth, with the best writers, the kind of writers who hadn't been compromised, the kind of writers who didn't worry about access. They could write about politics. They could write about anything without necessarily interviewing specific politicians and all that kind of thing. So I am just blown away still and I'm a subscriber to the Post and to many other papers. I watch a lot of stuff that I don't necessarily support politically or philosophically. I just do it because I need to be aware what the people who are listening to me are thinking and what they're reading about. So I have to stay in touch. But it just absolutely blows my mind that a product like the National Post could prostitute itself the way it has over the years to be essentially just an organ of the modern day Conservative Party of Canada. It feels like the stuff I was told by family members and friends of family in Eastern Europe when the media was either very pro-fascist or very pro-communist, but very irrelevant to the truth. My grandmother used to tell me that the only time she could count on anything that was true was on her shortwave radio with the volume turned way low so that no neighbor could ever hear her listening to the BBC and Radio Free America. Those were the only two sources that she felt could be giving her any sense of the truth as she was cowering behind the Iron Curtain.
So
we've got an Iron Curtain. We've got an Iron Curtain right now. I hate to put it this way, but Dean, you can back me up on this. We have an Iron Curtain in Canada sealing off the truth from the public by media people who still want to play this binary game.
You embarrassed that you were part of that? I am.
I felt embarrassed the last few years. The last few years were very
humbling.
Yeah, they were humbling. They were painful. They were, I'll always call a spade depressing. The last few years in radio were depressing. I could hardly wait to get the hell out. It wasn't the girl I brought to the dance.
All of us. I mean, to see that change, and I wonder if we were sort of boiled frogs in that ecosystem, right? Like we get into these jobs and people give you money and they give you influence. And, you silo information. You only got it, as I said earlier, from free paces. So, the mantle of a radio guy or a writer, in your case, both, and TV guy, to be able to have that influence is very odd, right? Like, it doesn't happen every day. And so, I look at guys like you and I look at us very differently. I look at us like we were marks for that institution, right? They wanted us because they knew if they gave us a bunch of money, we were great orators, good communicators. That I look at it differently. I used to think, oh my God, like I'm such a genius at this job that the world needs me, right? And then you're as soon as it's over, the merry-go-round stops. You're like, wait a second, you guys used me. You know what I mean? Like that's the environment that I live in now, where the embarrassment or the reckoning over being in media and really giving away shame, like giving my pride away to shame, where it's like, hey, we need you to do this. Hey, you can't say that. And you're like, you know what? And I grew up with this attitude, like my parents, because my parents are immigrants, under no circumstances any relation to the journey that you went through. But we grew up with this idea that you ride for the brand, right? You do what's asked of you because that company pays you to do what's asked of you. Yes, sir. No, sir. 3 bags full, sir. And a big paycheck was attached to it, like a big one. And there are very few of those big paychecks in that industry. And those paychecks don't exist anymore, by the way. But we knew what side of the bread the butter was on, right? The fact that doesn't matter anymore, specifically to guys like us, is freeing, number one. But it's also scary for them now, right? Like, I don't know about your relationships in traditional media, specifically at Chorus now, where, you can't wait to get out because you're compromised, you're embarrassed. The culture is taking over the idea that you're a journalist. That free will is being removed from you to be entertaining and really deliver the job. So you're handcuffed as a performer. Do you feel like this is your responsibility to now be able to kind of be the best version of you? Because I do. Like, the entertainment and the fun and the dick jokes and like all the other stuff. It's great. I still love it, all that other stuff. But I've never felt a sense of purpose in this industry other than selfish purpose up until the last couple of years. And I'd love to get your thoughts.
Well, look, I was asked whether, when I do my last show, I was asked whether or not I want to, treat it as retirement. And I remember how angry I got about that. And the reason I got angry was because there was no effing way that I was going to retire doing specifically what I was doing, which felt like a severely compromised version of me. So I didn't know exactly what I was going to do after my last day in radio, but I knew that they can take away my freedom to do things. They can try to strip me of my dignity and what have you, but they can't take away what I've got in there, what I've got in my fat stomach, what I've got in my core, because that was given to me by people much better than them. That's not going away. So I just, and I don't mean for this to sound sappy, but I dreamed of this day, Dean. I dreamed of the day where someone would open the gates to me to be able to just be the same person that I've been all my life, unfettered, unplugged, unembarrassed, unashamed, grateful for the opportunity to do what I'm doing right now. And I knew that someday that would happen. I just didn't know when. I just didn't know who. I just didn't know where. But I knew that there must be people who are highly aware that I can give her, and I can give her a whole lot better than I was giving her in those last few compromised years.
Yeah, us actually, we're aware of it. And we're grateful for it. And we'll end there today. And we're going to talk again on a weekly basis. Charles Adler is now part of Crier Media, crier.co. You can go and check out his bio. He is, man, I run out of superlatives and I sound like I'm kissing ass. But you're it, man. When we dream about the people that we want to work with, the groups that we want to put together for the betterment of the people that we're talking to be able to educate, to be able to have some fun while we're doing it, make people feel good about their decisions, affirm the better parts of humanity. You're it. And I couldn't count myself more grateful. And I meant everything I said in the post, everything I've said publicly, and I'll say it here again as we plant our flags together, that there's an opportunity here for us to actually make a difference and sort of be a part of the fabric of the new way of being able to communicate going forward. And there ain't nobody in this country. There may be nobody in North America that I'm aware of that is a better communicator and a better human being and more altruistic in terms of intention, because where that comes from is pure, right? The reason why you're doing this, what holds true to the very fiber of your being, your values and your virtues. A great honor to be able to work with you. And we're going to talk again next Wednesday. And look for Charles Adler's podcast, which we will be working on and launching mid-June. We will have more details for you. At Charles Adler on Twitter is where you can find him right now. CharlesAdler.com is the name of his website. Really easy to find. If you go to CharlesAdler.com, you can check it out. You can check out his bio. He's also for rent if you need voice work done and you need some guy to do a professional job of anything. He writes for the Winnipeg Free Press as well. He'll be writing for Crier Media. Great pleasure to say crier.co is the home of Charles Adler, my friend.
Well, I can't thank you enough for helping to build a bridge for me back to the people I love. Canada, number one, but a close number two, the United States. When it comes to podcasting, it doesn't matter what part of the world people want to hear you in. I just can't thank you enough for giving me the opportunity to be me, to be the son of a tailor.
Thank you. Charles Adler, ladies and gentlemen. Look for him very soon. Thanks to everybody for joining us. Really appreciate Charles being here. I appreciate everybody sharing some time with us today. And don't forget, everything we do, you can get at deanblundell.com, which is now crier.co. You can also go to YouTube, check out what we do there, subscribe to all of our podcasts. We will start unfurling the Charles Adler brand and making sure that you are aware of where you can find everything this gentleman does. Because if there's one thing this country needs, it is that man. And I am grateful to have a chance to work with him. You should be grateful to have a chance to hear from him. There are truth tellers. There are people with lanterns that are trying to walk through the fog. He is one of them. So for us to be involved with Charles is truly incredible. But look for everything Charles Adler related at Charles Adler on Twitter, charlesadler.com. Please go and visit his website. You can also check him out at crier.co. Look for his brand new podcast, which is TBD, probably coming up in the next 3 to 4 weeks. But again, we'll tell you all about that. Have a wonderful day, everybody. I want to thank our partners and our friends at CanTorque for making this possible. Canada's assembly tool experts, making rugged, hardworking, beautiful torque wrenches. Going to see Colin this weekend at Mosport. That happens tomorrow. But in the meantime, if you're in the heavy machinery industry, forestry, nuclear, railroad, steel, doesn't matter. No matter the scale of your bolting project, they have your loosening and fastening solution. They make all the torque wrenches you need for whatever job that you can't find a torque wrench for. Go to cantorque.com today for more information. We're also brought to you by Gitch, luxury branded underwear, boxer briefs engineered for any level of performance in everyday life. Buy 3, get 1 free. Promo code GITCH3 at edsfineimports.com. Canadian made, gosh darn it, for Canadian men. Or anybody who wants to wear a pair of these bad boys. Pouch in the front, super breathable, barely their fabric. Go to edsfineimports.com, pardon me, and use promo code GITCH3 at checkout. You'll get 4 for the price of 3. And yet again, of course, our friends at kivlaw.ca. If you're up against it, legally you got an issue, you need help walking through it. You don't want to pretend you're a lawyer in court. Tends to not work out. So you're going to call, if you're in Southern Ontario, Kivlaw Defense Lawyers, and shoot them an email, Robert at kivlaw.ca. Again, Robert at kivlaw.ca, or check out a list of what they do at kivlaw.ca as well. You don't want to go through life with a big legal issue. It's a terrible idea. And I've seen people try to defend themselves in court. Never works out. Usually never works out. I mean, maybe there's a genius like a Doogie Howser guy out there who's like, I got this, and he like aces it. I've never seen it. However, you need a good lawyer? Kivlaw.ca. Check it out today. Have a great day, everybody. We'll see you next week, Monday morning, back on Wednesday with Charles. Have a wonderful weekend, long weekend as well. Enjoy Canadian. We'll see you then. Bye.